Hi everyone, and welcome to PHM North America's first webinar about climate action. And tonight we are talking specifically about the connection between race, health, and environmental justice. My name is Lee Haynes. I'm with the People's Health Movement, USA. I'm also on or one of the representatives for People's Health Movement North America on the PHM Global Steering Council, and I'm here with my co-representative.
Hi, I'm Baj Mukhopadhyay. I'm from PHM Canada, and I'm also a co-representative with Lee on the Global Steering Council. And I'm really happy to be here with you guys today.
Um, as we said, we're from the People's Health Movement. We're a group of, or Baj and I are from the People's Health Movement. We are a group of individuals and activists who advocate for health as a human right. Um, and one of the issues that's impacting health and people's rights these days is climate change. Climate change impacts people's lives in many ways, including their health. Um, from the air we breathe to access to healthy food to the water that we drink. If you were able to watch the preview video for this hangout, Naomi Klein gives a lot of examples of how climate change and the activities that contribute to climate change affect people from day to day. And she says that the movement of climate action has already started, that we've already taken to the streets, that we just need to find each other. So PHM wanted to put on this webinar and a series of webinars to help activists who are out there kind of find each other and connect with a united voice for climate action, and to also highlight how climate change impacts our health, some of the disparate impacts it has on our communities, and to also strategize and look forward as to how we can take action moving forward. So we are here with two people out there in the field doing the work, Nellis Kennedy Howard and Bryan Parras, and I will let them introduce themselves. Nellis?
Great. Thanks, Lee. My name is Nellie Kennedy Howard. I work for Sierra Club's Beyond Coal to Clean Energy campaign. I'm based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I thought it would be a good time for me just to share a little bit about myself and how I came about to do the work that I'm doing today. And I have to admit that the preview video was really great in that it started out talking about how a person can be in denial of climate change. And I don't want to say that I was in denial, but I was ignoring it. And I think now I realize that in order to deny it, you really are. In order to ignore it, you really are denying it. And about a dozen years ago, I just really didn't. I thought that it wasn't my issue. I wasn't interested. And that's kind of where I was. And I took a class in law school. It was called Natural Resources in Indian Country. And, you know, in these classes, you learn about all of these different cases that have happened about resource extraction on native lands. And I just learned about some of the horrible things that have happened on my reservation as far as resource extraction. And I learned about Church Rock uranium spill. And I don't know how many people actually know about Church Rock uranium spill, but it's actually the largest radioactive spill in the United States. Much larger than 3 Mile Island, and it was pretty significant, and it happened less than 20 miles from where my family lived on the Navajo Reservation. And as soon as I learned about that, I realized that my mother's cancer that she had been fighting at the time, thyroid cancer, was not a coincidence. And it made me upset. It made me angry, and because of it, it made an activist out of me. And so I ended up deciding to get a certificate in federal Indian law and also in natural resources law. And after law school, I went to work for an organization called Honor the Earth, which is led by Winona LaDuke, and spent some time working on tribal lands on my reservation, on the Navajo Reservation. And now I find myself working for Sierra Club's Beyond Coal to Clean Energy program because there are a number of coal plants on my reservation today. So that's just a little bit about me and why I do what I do.
Thanks, Nellis. Now it's Brian's turn.
All right, can y'all hear me?
I think you need to be a little bit louder, Brian.
Okay, is this better?
That's
Sorry,
better.
I'm using a microphone. I do radio and media work, so pardon me. And actually, I wanted to show y'all a little video to introduce myself because I think it captures sort of why I got into this and talks a little bit about my background. So I'll do that right now.
Did we lose you, Brian?
I think we don't hear your sound, Bryan.
All right, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Well, scratch the video. It was working earlier, and it's not anymore. Let me see. Stop. 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 All right. Can y'all hear me now? Hello? Are y'all able to hear me now?
Yes.
That's good.
Okay.
That's good,
I'm
Brian.
sorry. I messed up the technology. I apologize. Basically, my parents are from West Texas, not far from New Mexico, in a little town called Big Spring, and I consider myself like a second generation oil baby. My mom grew up in a smaller town called Forsan, and also, all in the Permian Basin. And they moved to Houston, and at the time, I didn't really think too much about it, but okay, they're telling me to talk louder. Sorry, but as I grew up, I realized that Houston, had one of the largest petrochemical refining facilities in the world, and I had to reckon with that. I had to deal with that. I had to think about all of the health impacts that I grew up with in a different way. And so when I got back from college, I was teaching, and that's when I began to really sort of think about how I can work using my talents that I had gained in college, and also start to sort of contribute and help other folks. And so I used media to sort of document some of the issues that were happening here in the East End of Houston, and I've been doing that since. And it started out with a focus on this one school that was being built near 3 refineries, and it has led to international work. And in fact, I'll be leaving the country in just 2 days. So it's incredible how much I didn't know growing up, much like yourself, much like all of us. A lot has happened in just the 10 years, and I'm looking forward to chatting more about that.
Great. Thank you, Bryan and Nellis, for your introductions. And you're right, it's really interesting to hear the overlaps in both of your experiences. One thing that I want to mention is for anyone who's watching, there is a question and answer function inside the Google Hangouts app. And if you move your mouse cursor to the left side of the screen, there's 2 things I want to point out to you. There's one app called Showcase, and it looks like tags hanging, like yellow tags. And with the Showcase function, you can see some information about the People's Health Movement in the U.S. and Canada, and also some information about Nellis's Sierra Club's coal campaign or anti-coal campaign, and also some information about Tejas. And then the other app for you to use is the Q&A app. It's a blue bubble that says Q&A. And if you click on that, a menu or window will come up on the right side of your screen where you can ask us a question. And we'll be monitoring that area for questions. And then later on in our discussion, we'll address your questions. So one of the things we wanted to talk about tonight is some of the direct health impacts from especially extractive industries like coal mining and oil drilling, which Nellis and Bryan work around, and some of the health impacts from those as they both contribute to climate change, and also the disparate health impacts from those activities that you've witnessed in your communities, or the communities that you work with or have grown up in. So Nellis, could you talk about some of the health impacts you've seen in communities you've worked with and the disparate health impacts there?
Absolutely. So just to tell you a little bit more, so the work that I do is primarily focused in Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado, and then also the Ute Reservation in Utah. And across those states that I just mentioned, there are a number of tribal reservations located in each of those. And coal is big in my region, unfortunately. Unless we continue reducing our carbon emissions, which contribute to climate change, catastrophic extreme weather events are going to continue to happen. And climate disruption is a threat to our everyday lives and to the lives of children in the future. And something that I had mentioned in the bio that I had provided is, what world are we leaving our children? And as Native peoples, I feel that we have a responsibility to the 7th generation, and that means to maintain a balance and to restore harmony in order to protect generations that are coming after us. So climate disruption impacts, health impacts that I've seen, they can include basic weather patterns and changes in water supplies that directly impact how Native peoples can grow our traditional foods, which impacts our diets, which impacts our health, which contributes to a number of the health problems that Native peoples have today, including type 2 diabetes, obesity, overweight. So it impacts the kinds of diseases that we have, the insects that exist in our homelands, and ultimately our ability to keep our families and homes safe. So on the Navajo Reservation, which is my reservation, it's roughly 300,000 people that are member citizens of the Navajo Nation, and it's roughly the size of West Virginia. So it's a big reservation out in the southwest area. And there on my reservation, you can already see the impacts of climate disruption that would also include unprecedented droughts, wildfires, record-breaking heat, and flooding. And the bottom line is that climate disruption, because of all of these things, including the health impacts, actually contributes to nearly 500 million deaths a year. And that's a lot. That's too many. And it's time now for us to fight climate change.
Nellis. Bryan, do you see disparate health impacts in communities you work in Texas and the Gulf Coast?
Yeah, definitely. I switched mics. I went back to my internal mic. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So it's I think for me, it was my own personal experience that really led me down the road into thinking about the impacts, not just in my community, but then, in other brown and black and Native communities all over the country. And the difficult thing is a lot of the illnesses and a lot of the health symptoms that we see are very subtle and can be mistaken for everyday colds, flus, headaches, nosebleeds, things like that. So I grew up with all sorts of, problems. I was always tired, for example, always tired, and I just thought I was lazy. I had headaches all the time. and my stomach seemed to be a very, very weak stomach, and I had a lot of internal gastrointestinal problems. And so, again, these sort of were everyday experiences, you know, sometimes more severe than others. And I didn't really put all of that together until I started looking at the chemicals that were coming out of the refineries, coming out of the chemical plants. And I saw that all of the symptoms that I had experienced as a young child were the same ones that that I had, you know, that they had described on these data sheets. And the problem with that is it really does impact your ability to study. It impacts your ability to concentrate, to focus, and it starts such at an early age that it really steers children into a direction, right? And it takes away your full potential in a very subtle way. And the same thing with the cancers and the other issues. You know, those things take sometimes decades to manifest, and so we grow up thinking that this is just a normal way of life for us. And it wasn't until I got out of Houston and moved to Austin that I started to realize that other folks don't live like we do. You know, they don't have 40, 50, 18-wheelers going through their street every day. They don't have, you know, this scenery of refineries and petrochemical plants like we do. And then, you know, from looking at other communities in New Orleans and New Mexico, all across the Southwest and the South, it started to make sense, you know. And I live in a city where Dr. Robert Bullard, you know, considered the grandfather of environmental justice. Like, none of that knowledge was ever shared with us in school. And so it's really upsetting, and it's really sad that in a city where we also have the largest and world-renowned medical center, that we don't have doctors going into these communities and discussing these things and talking about these things. So there's definitely a difference and a disparity from the east side of Houston and the west side of Houston. And it's something that we've been trying to work on through Tejas.
So I'm happy that you said that, because one of the things I wanted to ask you both about in your work is, personally, you've experienced, you've seen, you've talked to people who have experienced these health impacts from, you know, extractive activities that contribute to climate change, and then health impacts from climate change. But how have you responded to people who have kind of denied that there's a connection between people's health and those activities? Because I know there are, you know, a lot of people who deny these things, or who might you know, connect people's health issues with something else. And like you said, Bryan, doctors don't really go into the communities to help out. So I wonder, what do y'all do to make this connection in the communities, and then with people who don't actually live there and who might be kind of naysayers as well? Nellie?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I so very much appreciate Bryan bringing up the fact that some people, you know, even my family included and myself included, not recognizing health impacts for what they are and what is causing them. I've heard lots of stories, you know, people suffering from asthma or from lung disorder diseases, heart attacks, emergency room visits, all because of coal plants that exist in the northwest corner of New Mexico. And, you know, it's one of the reasons why I think it's so important for people to get involved, and education is a big part of that. I mean, for instance, if I had, if I didn't realize that there was, you know, the country's largest uranium spill happened 20 miles from where my family lives, I may not have made the connection to my mother having thyroid cancer, which is a pretty big deal when it comes to radiation And I even, after that, I started to inquire of my different family members, and so many of us have thyroid problems. I actually have something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is discovered after Chernobyl. And it's a pretty big deal because of the impacts of radiation from that uranium spill. And it's just tragic. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done in order to connect the dots the way that Bryan was talking about. I think that that's a big part of it. And then also, just shifting away from the carbon-intensive fuels and extractive industries and production that's happening in the communities that I work. So, which takes a lot of education in and of itself, but talking about the impacts that coal mining and coal burning has on local communities, and connecting the dots for people. And now is really a big time for Native people, all people, but Native people in particular, to make a big difference in a big way in order to shift away from extractive industries, coal burning, and instead to transition to clean energies like wind and solar technologies, which don't release the same amount of carbon as coal burning. And if there is a silver lining to this, and I'm not saying necessarily that there is, it is that wind and solar are booming industries right now, and they can provide a lot of jobs to reservations which are combating against extreme poverty rates and unemployment rates. So this is really an opportunity to educate folks on what can be the impacts of coal burning or natural gas and oil, the benefits of transitioning to clean energy, and ultimately also to to talk about it's easier for tribes to do planning against climate disruption now than it is to clean up the mess when catastrophic events happen because of climate disruption. So I would say that those are some of the big things that we're working on in my region.
Thanks. And Bryan, how do you kind of respond to the folks who might deny that there are health consequences from those activities, and how would you say we can maybe try to overcome that?
Sorry, guys, I was on mute again. It's different. My attitude has kind of changed over the years. Early on, it was, a very, very open and honest sort of presentation to folks, and we were asking a lot of questions, but we had our own experience and our own sort of data from having our bodies as tools to tell us what was happening. We had our friends and families who lived in the neighborhood as data to tell us, but we learned from very smart, educated people that that was anecdotal data, and that wasn't really useful because we couldn't prove that link between the chemical or that plant and our symptoms and our health impacts. And the same goes for climate change. It's very, very interesting how people who have a lot to lose tend to ask for more data before they'll make a decision on a topic. And for us, we're losing it daily. Our health, our lives, our children, we're losing incrementally every day. And so I think the urgency is much, much more and felt more. And so we pay attention, right? We notice things. We're there on the ground. And because of that, I think it's not that we're against science or that we're against making these definite links, but we understand that that's a long time. And for many years, our communities have been poked and prodded and plucked and had our blood taken and our hair and our urine just to prove certain things. And what we find is that there's never enough information for folks to make a strong case or to convince themselves even that that this is what's happening. And so in the end, I think it's very, very smart to be safe, to be precautious. And we know enough at this point to move forward. And if something like climate change and all of the things that we've all seen and witnessed, there's a segment on the news every night now called extreme weather. I don't think that was normal, and I don't think that's attributed to all the cameras that are around now. This is real. It's happening before our eyes, and in many different subtle ways than we imagine. I wanted to share a picture with y'all of this of the cleanup workers, for example. That's a big deal for us here in the Gulf South. We have a lot of hurricanes, and often the people who do the cleanup work are minorities, oftentimes migrants looking for work, and they're exploited, and they're put in harm's way during the cleanup process too. And then we're left with all of the wreckage and the contaminated soil and all those things also. Those are then dumped in our communities and our neighborhoods too. So it's interesting, when we think about climate change, it's not just about vector-borne diseases, it's not just about the heat, it's not just about the drought. There's the whole world, from the weather events to the cleanup to the destruction to the diseases. It's very dynamic. And we understand that, and we're making those connections on the ground because we're living them. And it's difficult. It's very difficult to collect that data in a way that will sort of translate to professionals, to scientists, to researchers, to politicians.
So, Bryan, I'm just going to interject here with a question that I think that's been coming to mind for both you and Nellis. I'm wondering, you make a lot of allusion to the fact that a lot of the cost and the burden of proof falls to your communities, like Native communities in the Southwest, to Latino or people of color communities in the South. And I'm wondering how do you get the communities to actually, how do the communities actually deal with always having to be the ones to kind of bring the evidence, and that they're the ones who have to do the convincing? Like, how do you get people to do that work? And doesn't that work get exhausting? I don't know if both Nellis or Bryan, you might have ideas or thoughts on that.
I would say absolutely that you're right. I think that local impacted communities are the ones that feel it the most, so it's harder for them to make the case. And usually, at least from my experience, what's happening is that the damage is being done by a large corporation or utility or mining company, and it's hard for an impacted community to make a drop in the bucket against something like that. And so making sure that those voices are heard is absolutely critical, and it requires coordination, I think. There are so many groups that I can think of, fantastic groups who are doing great work and raising red flags and making a huge difference. I work for an organization called Sierra Club, which is a pretty big environmental organization, and we as an organization have made strides, I think, in how to be a good partner in order to make sure that we're lifting up those local voices, being sure that their stories are being told, making sure that they're getting the support that we have, and that it's actually wanted. I mean, as a big national organization, we try to go where we are invited and to play a role that is that we can play best. And I was hoping to touch on that a little bit later, but I think that you're right. That is definitely one of the struggles that local impacted communities face.
Bryan?
Yeah, it's we don't have a choice, Raj. We don't get to say, I'm tired. I don't care anymore. Unfortunately, people on the ground in these communities don't get to think that way. Um, However, there is something interesting that happens. You know, the human body is an incredible machine. You know, biological machine that just adapts so well. And so when we're introduced to stressors over time, the pain receptors shut off. You know, that's psychology, it's biology, and unfortunately, like that also puts us at a disadvantage. You know, people will say that these communities and the people who live there long enough will get used to it. You'll get used to it. You know, it stinks right now, but you'll get used to it. And to some extent, that happens, but not in the way that you think. That's not a positive attribute, right? No one should have to get used to having a headache every day. No kid should have to get used to having a bloody nose. That's not a normal situation. And so it's frustrating, it's tiring, and on top of that, we have to do all of the other things that other communities have to do, you know, to survive and work, go to school, and grow up. But I think you know, that's why it's so important to listen to these communities, because they have such important information. If you just think of it this way, if you are studying something, you know, you go to that place and you are present physically, and you use all the faculties that you have, you know, that were given to us by the Creator, our eyes, our nose, our hands, you know, and we use instruments to help us along with that in better ways, stronger ways, more intense ways. But we have all the faculties we need, and these communities, you know, have a really, really clear understanding of how these things operate. At some point, that gets shut down because of sheer exhaustion, and it takes a sort of mental focus and effort to continue to pay attention to those things. You know, for some it comes naturally, and for some, you know, it's more about moving on and living. You know, they don't have a choice. They have to be there for whatever reason, economics, all their families there, and that's all they know, right? That's the community that they know. There's no other place they want to go to. So it's difficult, but that's the reality, and that's why, you know, folks on the outside should be listening to these communities, and folks on the inside, you know, they need to be given opportunities to experience something else, so that they're not in this contaminated area 24/7, so that they can remind themselves that there are, you know, places where the situation is different. I didn't know what clean air smelled like till till I left Houston. I'm
So
serious, guys.
that's a great segue into our next question about how do you grow the movement. I think Lee would like to ask you a few
I
questions
wanted
about
to
that.
ask, because both of you have mentioned people's voices needing to be heard, getting the message out, um, and kind of informing the broader population, especially policymakers, and also other people in the community about what's going on, and also how to make a change, make some kind of difference for, you know, their health and people's lives. So I wonder if you all would talk about some of the things you actually do, some of the strategies you use, and how you are working to help people get their stories and their voices heard. Nellie.
That's a good question, and I think it's an important one, constantly a challenge. And I think that that's one of the reasons why you know, they talk about this work as being environmental justice work, because there is an injustice that's being done. with local communities, usually communities of color, low-income communities that are being targeted by larger, large corporations, extractive industries, coal mining companies, whatever they are, and it's hard because they have money. They have a lot of money. So I don't know if you've ever heard the term tribal energy sacrifice zone. It's a term that's used from time to time, but especially in the area that I work. So there's the Navajo Nation. I talked a little bit about the size of it. I think this is comparable to other places as well, though, where the Navajo Nation, it has two major coal plants right now on the reservation. Big, giant, disgusting, filthy, polluting coal plants that emit not only carbon, but things like mercury and nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, all these different pollutants that come out of it. And the power from those coal plants is actually sent off to places like Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Albuquerque, and it doesn't actually stay on the reservations themselves. The reservation itself, in fact, a good portion of the Navajo Reservation does not have electricity or running water for that matter. So the people who live in the shadow of these coal plants is not reaping the benefits of the power that's actually being generated on the land. So I think one of the things that we do in the work that I'm doing with the Sierra Club is making sure that as much as possible that people are making a connection to how and where their power is being generated. So for instance, when someone, connecting the stories, connecting the dots, that when people turn on the lights in Phoenix, or when they crank up their air conditioner, or when they turn on, when they head back to the hotel in Las Vegas, or whatever it is, that they realize where exactly that power is coming from. And that has a lot to do with lifting up local voices and being sure that their stories are being heard. So I think that making those connections is absolutely critical to winning, and critical to any type of successful movement. And part of that is becoming a good partner to those local communities to make sure that you are able to play the role that you can as an outsider in order to attain mutually beneficial goals.
Thanks. And Nellis, do you have an example of something that the Sierra Club has done, I guess, with your Beyond Coal campaign? The voices. I was on your website and I saw the really neat map of where all your actions are taking place and where people are being affected.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it depends, because, like I said, I don't want to. Sierra Club is just one of the organizations that's helping to put communities of color and low-income communities' voices out there. That is a role that we're learning to play in as best as possible. So I would hate to give examples of specific organizations that may have asked for our help in getting their voices heard. But there are different things that we can do of making sure that they have the resources and support necessary. So, for instance, there are federal regulations that come down on mining companies, mining industries related to carbon emissions. For instance, the Clean Power Plan that is coming down from EPA, and it's going to be finalized here pretty quick, which is a really great thing, is making sure that the information that we have related to regulations like that, the benefits that we know that it will have, that information is getting shared with local communities in order for them to share that information among decision makers, tribal councils, tribal leaders, utilities, et cetera, so forth. So a part of that is definitely information sharing.
Okay, thanks. That's really great, especially with something as complicated as a regulation coming down from the EPA. So, Bryan, how about Houston and the Gulf Coast? Are there particular strategies or ways that you're finding work to help people kind of get their stories out there and let people kind of outside of community? I don't know Houston that well, so I don't know west versus east, but to get them from one side to the other side.
Yeah, we have employed every kind of strategy you can imagine, from organizing in the community to organizing the academic community, the research community, doctors. We've also built alliances with other environmental justice organizations in Corpus Christi, and Port Arthur, and Port Lavaca, and San Antonio, and New Orleans, and Mossville, on and on and on. And regionally, I think what we realized was we have to work together, because it was not a win if one community fought off a facility from being constructed if all they did was pick up and move to another community. Our brothers and sisters down the road, that's not a win. We're still losing. And the global community, all of us are still losing. And that was a big reality, that we can't just think about our own little, corner and space in the world. My backyard is everyone's backyard. And so it's been a lot of learning about how to understand these global systems that exist, that are bringing these facilities to our neighborhoods, to our communities. Houston's going through a huge transformation at the port right now. And with the expansion of the Panama Canal, for example, we're getting larger and larger ships that are going to be coming to Houston now. So a lot of the traffic that was fought off in California, in San Diego, and Los Angeles, and other port communities along the West Coast are now going to make their way to the Gulf Coast. And Houston stands to see a lot of that growth. And so we've had to figure out, how to work together nationally and internationally on these things.
So one of the things that I saw, Bryan, that you were actually involved in was a protest at BP headquarters in Houston. Could you talk about that maybe for like a minute, and how that came about, who was there, and also what kind of happened afterwards, if there was any positive outcomes?
Yeah, so this is one of those examples of a regional, a very, very broad campaign to raise awareness and bring attention to the impacts that are still being felt from the BP drilling disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. And these were communities and networks of fishermen, EJ communities who may have been impacted by the BP spill in other ways, economically. Their homelands may have been ruined, like many tribal communities who live along the coast in Louisiana. And then, economically in the cities too, folks who had businesses, small mom and pop businesses, for example, bait shops, things like that. Many, many, many different ways that folks were impacted. And then, of course, the natural environment. We had allies who were also there, who had a huge concern about, the dolphins who have been dying in mass numbers, the fisheries. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and we wanted to mark the 5th year anniversary with the protest, with something, to make sure that folks understood that this was not over. No amount of money is going to bring back, all of the things that were lost along that, that whole coastal area. And this is at the heels, of a 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which will be coming up later this year.
That's great, Bryan. Thanks very much. I was wondering whether we could take a couple of questions that have come from viewers and participants. One we have from Irene Haynes in Jasper, a small town in East Texas, who's asking that they have an enormous amount of people who are suffering with different forms of cancer. And is it possible that these cases could be related to climate change? And there's just another one I'm going to ask, so maybe you can answer them together to wrap them, to kind of, for in the interest of time. The question I had is, both of you are talking a lot about strategies to make the movement bigger and grow outside of the local communities. And I'm just wondering the role of movements within racialized communities, such as migrants and indigenous peoples and people of color in general, about whether instead of just working within their own communities, whether there's ways to build across our different identities and our different racialized groups to build a movement, because racialized communities seem to be bearing so much of the cost of climate change, whether there was a way to kind of build a very broad alliance of racialized groups that could tackle the impact of climate change on health. So if you both had anything to answer on those two questions, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thinking about your second question in particular, and how to build an alliance across a number of communities and identities, I think that's a big one, because climate change impacts everyone. The health impacts of extractive industries doesn't stay in one particular area. We all share the same air and it flows. Especially, I'm thinking about the coal plants that I work on, across the Southwest, and how those, whether or not they're located on tribal lands, the pollution goes everywhere, even through the mercury that's emitted and out into the waters, and how that impacts New Mexicans and Arizonans alike. And so I think that creating the connections there and making sure that we are taking an approach where there is education being done, shared about the impacts of that with grass tops and grass roots people. So grass tops being people who might serve a special role within different communities is super important. And one of the examples that I could give for what we've done on a coal plant that just sits off the Navajo Reservation in New Mexico is where a number of groups came together to sign on to a letter calling on a particular elected leader to withdraw his support for a plan that would continue the burning of coal at a coal plant there. And 40 plus organizations signed on, and I don't know how many of those were actually Native, but I can tell you that the vast majority of them weren't, and it's because it is an important issue that crosses so many different lines, and making sure that people are aware of that.
I'll tackle the Texas question, I guess, since I'm in Texas. And who was the person asking the question? What was her name again?
Irene Haynes from Jasper.
Irene, okay. Wow, what a town. I just learned some cool history from Jasper, but I'll save that for another webinar. I don't know, Irene. It's that's the first step, though, to going on this journey that both of us have gone on. We asked a very simple question early on. Should this high school be built next to 3 refineries? And you slowly began to do the work to answer that question yourself by looking at your community. What's around there? What are some things that cause cancer in the first place? When you find that out, look at whether those things exist in your community. There will be some obvious things, if you see a big facility, building, plant, you see some smokestacks, those are really good places to start. Unfortunately, what happens is, people in positions of power will do the same thing against you. So they'll point the finger at you. Are you a smoker? What's your diet like? You pump gas every day, and when you do that, you're being exposed to benzene too. So don't let that get in your way. I would say, continue that journey and ask even, deeper questions. Well, what kind of cancer are you interested in? Which one are you thinking might be a problem in your area? Talk to your neighbors. How many of them have cancer? What kind of cancer do they have? Those are all good places to start. But the bottom line is we can no longer be ignorant And we can no longer just sort of not think about these issues. We have to be very, very active in our neighborhoods and in our communities. And there's no excuse anymore. You know, we have the internet. We're having a digital conversation for heaven's sake, you know, with 5 people all over the world. It's an incredible time, you know, to be alive, and it's our responsibility to ask these questions and to look for the answers. You know, we owe that to our children and our grandchildren, and if we're going to, you know, put any good to the incredibly destructive practices that have led to this technology and to these things that we have, these comforts, it's that we have to find a way to do this in a safe, responsible way that doesn't destroy the planet, that doesn't make people sick, and that, you know, if we can't do that, then maybe we don't deserve these things in the first place.
Thanks,
Thanks very much, Bryan.
So we have about 8 minutes or so left, and I guess I will give both of you some time to give some final words. And if you want to talk about how people might try to link up in their communities or with other movements around the nation or across the globe, for people to kind of, as I think Boz said earlier, people might feel isolated, maybe like Irene and Jasper might feel like she's the only one who's thinking about these issues. So if maybe for the next few minutes, if y'all can both talk about maybe connecting or linking up with your own work and how people can also link up with the wider movement. Nellie.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So thankful everyone is on today. Thank you for watching this discussion and being a part of it. We really appreciate that. And if you're interested in becoming involved with the Sierra Club, feel free to find your local Sierra Club chapter. So the Sierra Club has a national presence, and it also has a chapter in every state in the country, in the U.S. That is, we also have an international presence. So if you're not in the U.S. and you're interested in becoming involved, just shoot me an email, and that invitation goes out to anyone. If you have a specific area that you're working on and you would just like some more guidance on, feel free to shoot me an email, nellis.khoward@sierraclub.org, and I can point you in the right direction. And then as far as getting involved, I think that you know, a good place to start is to start asking, you know, where does my food come from? Where does my energy come from? And asking these questions of other people, and you'll start to gravitate to where you need to be when you start asking questions like that, and you'll find out more information, probably more than you ever wanted, but because of that, you'll also figure out how to get involved. And that, along with you know, pairing up with local communities where you're at to find out more and what you can do, I think is really important. But those are 2 good places that I would start.
Bryan?
Prompt me again, because I was going in so many directions. Yeah.
So just some final words for anyone watching about how to link up with any action or movements that are going on locally or globally, and especially if people are feeling discouraged, if they feel kind of isolated doing these things in their community.
Okay. First, I got a Facebook message from Refugio Mata, who wanted to say hello to Nellie. Used to work with her. I didn't get a message for myself, but I got one to say hi to you. You know, it can be very, very lonely doing this work, and in a place like Jasper, or in a small town like Mossville, or Africa Town in Alabama, you know, it can be dangerous in small towns in Louisiana and Texas and New Mexico and all over the world, and you can imagine how dangerous it can be in places, you know, in other countries. And so I understand that this is not an easy, task for a lot of folks. And I'm very lucky and I'm fortunate that I have a very strong, close-knit family and friends who live here in Houston. And it's a big city. And I've been targeted, and our organization has been targeted, and our friends have been targeted. I had a knock on the door from Homeland Security. And so these things are real, and we shouldn't downplay that. But we have to do this. We have to do this work, and it's as simple as, one, we have a right to not be poisoned, and we cannot trust that, the food we eat and the air we breathe and the water we drink is safe, because we've seen time and time again that corporations and government will lie, and other people will lie, so that's our task at hand, and we're in a very, very critical moment right now because of climate change, and everyone should be paying attention to this. When the Pope, speaks about it, and they don't have to, he doesn't have to, that it's real. When Exxon has been studying this since the 80s, and putting research to combat that, it's an important topic. When the military has looked at climate change and made changes to how they operate, it's real, and that we should be doing something about it too. So the folks on the ground are always the last to be involved, and the first to feel the impacts. And we need to communicate with each other more frequently. We need to, share with each other what we've learned, and we need to be very, very, vigilant stewards of our communities. And it doesn't have to be work. We have a lot of fun when we are doing this, and it's just becomes part of, our activities, much like anything else you might do in your community, like going to a baseball game, or going to the powwow, or going to ceremony, or going to whatever it is you do. This needs to be a part of that, and that's something that we've lost. This civic responsibility, this sort of environmental responsibility, this connection to this place that we live is something that we've lost, and we have to bring that back and incorporate it into our everyday life. And so I would say for folks in those small towns to reach out to us. We're also a lot of groups volunteer based, volunteer run, with members much like yourself, and don't be scared to reach out, and don't give up on us. We can't always get back to folks, the next day or even, the next week, but we see them, and we try to respond slowly as best we can. And we know that you're, having similar issues. Write about them, publish them, put them online, take photographs, talk to your neighbors, talk to your priest, talk to your guru, whoever it is, that is in your circles. We need to organize more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for both of those responses. Hopefully people got some really good ideas of how to link up with the movement. We are exactly out of time, but I'll quickly say thanks to Nellis and Bryan for joining us this evening, and for anyone who joined us online. And also you can find out more about the People's Health Movement at phmovement.org, and find out how to get in touch with us there. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.